All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Frederick, and I serve as the President and CEO of the Alexandria Housing Development Corporation. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in our second community meeting regarding our project on Seminary Road. We're excited to share with you the progress we've made to date. With me tonight, I have Kayla Hornbrook, our communications manager, Matt Rhodes, our development associate leading this project, and Mary Catherine Gibbs, our land use attorney. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kayla to provide some logistics for the meeting and a brief overview of AHDC. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So as John said, my name is Kayla Hornbrook. I'm the communications manager for AHDC. And I'm just going to talk through kind of what we'll be discussing, the order of the evening, and just a few rules for the order. So Matt, if you want to move to the next slide. I will be providing just a very brief high-level view of what AHDC does, who we are, what we've developed in the past. And then after that, Matt will be moving on to the Seminary Road proposal, where he will discuss the existing conditions, briefly touch on the previous concept plans, and then provide a detailed update of the concept 2 update to the plan that we have before you now. This will also include a brief overview of the project timeline that remains, and then we will move on to question and answers. So just a few things to note: this session is being recorded, so we will post this on our website and on YouTube within the next 24 to 48 hours. If you are on open mic at any point during the session, you will be recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, but you do have questions, we do ask that you use the question and answer box. Regarding questions, we'll be taking them at the end. If you want to speak on open mic to ask your question, we ask that you hit the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you would like to ask a question using the Q&A box, you can just type it into the chat whenever you'd like. We won't get to any questions until we get to the question and answer period. Finally, if you have any technical issues, issues with the Zoom screen or somebody's on mute and we haven't caught on to that, please use the chat box function instead. The question and answer box, all of the questions are visible to all participants. The chat box is only visible to the 4 panelists on the screen. Lastly, after this presentation, we will be sending out an email with the slides and a link to where we will put the written Q&A and the video as well in the future once we have those resources ready to go. So just very briefly about AHDC, we are a nonprofit affordable housing developer. We work exclusively inside the city of Alexandria. And since 2004, we have developed, purchased, renovated, or acquired 700 units that serve over 1,000 residents in 8 buildings. On the next page, we'll have just a map overview of where all of our locations are. The locations that are numbered in circles are existing locations, and then the locations in stars are proposed locations. Number 7 is a proposed development in the Orlandia-Chiarlagua neighborhood, and number 8 is the Seminary Road proposed development that we're here to discuss tonight. You can learn about each of these properties on our website, housingalexandria.org, and you'll click on the tab that says current properties, and for the 2 proposal ones, upcoming properties. Next slide. One thing I wanted to highlight that isn't on our website as one of our properties, but it's very relevant to this conversation, is that AHDC has recently completed a redevelopment partnership with Sheltered Homes of Alexandria. So this is a Delray neighborhood location that we partner with Sheltered Homes of Alexandria to provide consulting and guidance as it comes to redeveloping this property. It's 12 units, they're all 1 bedroom, and 6 of the units are wheelchair accessible units. In addition to the interior renovation of the building and the environmental work that happened with each of those units, there's a new rainwater runoff system on the site, new landscaping, and secured entrances that are covered by those covered portico walkways. Construction on this project lasted from February 2020 to April 2021, and residents returned last month. If you'd like to learn more about Sheltered Homes of Alexandria, you can visit them at their website, shelteredhomesalexandria.org, where you can see the other properties they work with and more about the services they provide. The last thing that I'm going to mention briefly is, in addition to the development and renovation work that AHDC does, we also provide resident services for those who live in our properties. Pre-COVID, this focused a lot on health and wellness activities, including our community gardens, as well as reduced cost memberships to YMCA or Capital Bike Share. During COVID, we pivoted to help support our residents through the pandemic. Those who were impacted by COVID for whatever reason could apply to our emergency rent assistance program. Since March 2021, AHDC has distributed over $1 million in rent assistance through all of our sources combined. Outside of rent assistance, we also supported with food distributions and Christmas assistance with Toys for Tots. So now I'm going to pass it over to Matt, who will discuss the Seminary Road kind of history of the development, as well as bring up to our current concept 2 submission. Matt?
Thanks, Kayla. Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Rhodes. I'm a real estate development associate at AHDC and a member of the development team for the Seminary Road project. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Some of you may have been with us in April when we first discussed this project. We're happy to have you and welcome any questions you have about the changes to our project. For those who are joining us for the first time, I would first like to take a few minutes to provide some background on the project and demonstrate how we've gotten to this point before addressing our newest concept submission. AHD's project on Seminary Road involves the assemblage of 3 parcels at 4547, 4555, and 4575 Seminary Road. Currently, there are 2 existing homes at 4547 and 4555. The parcel furthest to the west, 4575, is a city-owned vacant parcel. In total, by combining these 3 parcels, we will be able to create a developable site of approximately 2.69 acres. To put the site in a bit more context, here is its location within the surrounding neighborhood. To the west of the site is the Francis C. Hammond Middle School, with connections to I-395 just off this map. Also to the west are the Ellen Coolidge Burke Branch Library at point 3, the Encore Apartments at point 5, and the City of Alexandria Fire Station, immediately adjacent to the property at point 6. Seminary Hills neighborhoods border the site to the east and to the south. Also to the south is the Inova Alexandria Hospital site, which is just within the quarter-mile buffer at point 9. Turning our attention back to the site, I'd first like to address some of the existing conditions that made the site layout a challenge. 2 of the biggest challenges to the site design were the presence of 2 storm sewers that run through the property. One storm line runs south to north through the site. If you're able to see my cursor, it's running in this direction. And this sewer collects rainwater from Seminary Road. The second runs more east to west across the site. Both lines meet at the northern edge of the site and continue north beyond the property lines as one combined line. These lines all have existing easements restricting building within a certain distance. We had to accommodate the existing easements in our site design and allow the city to access the storm lines as needed. This meant that we could not build any homes within the existing easements. Another challenge we faced on the site was the presence of a wetland of minimal ecological value as determined by the Army Corps of Engineers and the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. This wetland is rather small, shown at number 2, and the dashed line is a 50-foot buffer around the wetland. AHDC made the decision to leave this area undisturbed and not develop within the 50-foot buffer. The final challenge we faced is the general topography of the site. The site is highest along Seminary Road, here at the bottom of the site diagram, with grading falling as you move to the back of the site. The east and west sides of the property also slope into the middle of the parcel. Our design team had to be conscious of this topography as they planned the drive that circles the interior of the site and had to adapt the grading accordingly. With these constraints in mind, I do want to make reference to the 2 previous concepts that we submitted to the city. We submitted an initial concept 1 in September of 2020. This concept featured a large multifamily rental building on the western side of the site, along with 12 ownership townhomes and 3 SHA flats. Working with the city, it was determined that the entrance to the site needed to align with Pickett Street. Previously, we had shown it entering the middle of the site here. This required a complete reworking of the original concept and made the multifamily building in this location an impossibility. This change led to our revised concept 1 submission submitted in February of 2021 on the right side of your screen. This design moved the entrance west to align with Pickett. In this concept, we also shifted from a rental and ownership project to a project that is 100% affordable home ownership. We introduced a site layout that accommodated 31 townhomes. The design also included a 3-story condominium flat building that offered 6 2-bedroom ownership flats and 3 4-bedroom units that will be owned and operated by Sheltered Homes of Alexandria. This brings us to the current design, which in many ways is a refinement of our February site layout. The concept we will be submitting tonight, the Concept 2 submission shown here, was submitted to the city on May 14th of 2021. The current plan still features 31 townhomes, which are a mix of 2 and 3-bedroom units. We are currently proposing a mix of 16 2-bedroom units and 15 3-bedroom units. Each townhome is 3 levels with a lower level garage. All townhomes are targeting households at or below 80% of area median income. The condominium flats buildings remains in the same location, shown here on the right side of your screen. It includes 5 ownership flats, along with 3 units operated by SHA. Finally, the site has a total of 81 parking spaces, including 19 surface parking spaces. This number of parking spaces exceeds the city's parking requirements for a development of this size. While the Concept 2 submission was in many ways a refinement of our previous submissions, there are a few key changes. First, we made further improvements to the entrance and intersection at Pickett Street. We previously proposed a shared entrance with the fire station. After a site visit with representatives from the fire department, it was clear that maintaining the station's existing access separate from Pickett Street, separate from the Pickett Street intersection alignment would be preferable. We are now showing one entrance to the development that will align with Pickett, along with the existing fire station entrance separate from the development. The second change we made was removing a previously proposed public path to the unimproved open space at the rear of the site. Through conversations with the city, it was determined that a future path would be more appropriate on the western edge of the property, seen here on the left side of the diagram. We'll be providing a sidewalk on this edge of the property in anticipation of a future park connection. The third change from the previous concept were the adjustments to the condominium flats building. We stepped the building down in places to address concerns over the building height. This did require the footprint of the building to expand and resulted in the loss of 1 ownership flat. I'll address some of these changes in more detail later in this presentation. Finally, this submission required a rezoning request to accommodate the replacement of the existing congregate housing operated by SHA. Ahdc will continue to work with the city to accommodate the existing congregate housing and this proffered plan. Moving beyond the site layout, we have also made progress on the design of the homes. I'd like to take a quick walk around the site to show some of our thinking. Before I begin, I will note that all colors, finishes, and design features are subject to change and are still under review by the city. I'll start with the 3 units off the entryway. Units throughout the development have a mixture of materials and colors to make them feel distinct. The units shown here are finished with hardy siding panel in 3 different colors. Other units shown will be finished with brick. Also shown here is a typical garage detail, which is similar for all townhomes throughout the development. This is the garage for a 2-bedroom unit. 3-bedroom garages not shown will be slightly wider. A typical end elevation is also shown on the bottom right, which will be siding or brick depending on the end unit's materials. In this image, we are also showing small enclosures to hide meters and utilities that will service the buildings. The site plan on screen also shows our initial landscaping concepts. The homes that front Seminary will face the street with trees lining the sidewalk. Finally, as a more general note, all townhomes throughout the development are under 35 feet in height, with the average finished floor height closer to 33 feet. Moving along Seminary, we have a stick of 6 townhomes. These feature a mix of brick and siding with varying architectural details, such as a bay window and entryway canopies. In the site map on the left, I would also like to highlight the 2 paths on each side of the townhomes. You can see my cursor there, here and here. These provide pedestrian access into the site and connection to an existing bus stop. Moving further up Seminary, units 10 through 13 are the final units that face the street. They have bay windows to provide some differentiation between the various groups of towns. They also feature unique siding colors to make each home feel distinct. Trees again front this set of homes to screen from the street, along with landscaping to the east between the end unit and the property line. Townhomes 14 to 22 are the first units encountered on the interior of the site. These units sit on the western edge of the property and face the fire station. While the homes facing Seminary and the Stonebridge neighborhood to the east are more traditional and in line with the existing architecture, these homes are more modern with some striking brick color choices. These homes are also built into the grade of the hillside and appear to be only 2 stories from the front, but the back shows the typical 3-story design with rear loaded parking. This group of towns is also the first in which we introduced brick to the typical end design. Before leaving this slide, I also want to highlight the inclusion of downspouts on the colorful brick units. You can see some of them here and here and here. These downspouts are present on all homes and funnel rainwater into bioretention planters in front of each unit. Moving to the interior road, units 23 to 28 return to a more traditional style with subtle detailing around the roofline and mullions in the windows. These units open to the interior courtyard within the development. The final stick of towns are units 29 to 31. These units are also more traditional and have a unique design that includes a sloping mansard roof. They also open onto the internal courtyard. Here is the final image of the townhomes as a group. I hope everyone can see the variety of colors, materials, and designs that we feel bring interest to the development and a sense of individuality to each home. As a reminder, the set of homes on the top faces the fire station. The 2 groups of homes in the middle of the screen sit in the middle of the site and face Stonebridge to the east. Finally, the 3 groups of townhomes on the bottom of the screen face Seminary Road. I'll briefly share the floor plans for these units. Here are the typical 2 and 3 bedroom floor plans. I don't want to dwell here for very long. If you're interested in more information on the unit designs, we would invite you to visit our website for a copy of this presentation and the concept submissions, where you can see these plans in more detail. I'd like to spend a few more minutes, though, discussing the remaining building in the project, which is the Condominium Flats. The Condominium Flats building holds the 4-bedroom SHA units and the 5 ownership flats. This building has an elevator, allowing the SHA flats to be fully accessible and giving us the option to make the ownership flats accessible as needed. There is also a community room on the ground floor that opens up to a small patio on the north side of the building. As I mentioned before, this building has undergone some changes. Previously, the entire building was planned to be 3 stories with 1 below grade level. This meant that the building felt more like a 4-story building from the east as the grade sloped towards the property line. We tried to address this in part by removing 1 floor from the northern half of the building and creating a step down as the building moved down the hill. Some other details I'd like to highlight include variation in brick and hardy siding material that help break up the face of the building. Window bays add articulation to the building and offer a few extra square feet of space on the interior. Window mullions and brick trim, as well as subtle cornice details, have also been added. Looking at the western elevation, the height of the building is approximately 33 feet at its highest point, which is on the right of the image, and steps down to 23 feet at the lower section of the building. Landscaping shown here on the left will also be added around the patio area as well as between the building and the property line to help screen the building from the adjacent homeowners. The specific plantings will be adjusted to provide the most year-round coverage. Not shown here is a new fence that we are also proposing to provide additional privacy at the lower levels for the condominium residents and the existing property owners. Shown here are typical floor plans for the condominium flats. The basement level shows the proposed community room and one of the 2-bedroom ownership flats. The ownership units are all approximately 1,120 square feet. This is shown here as the community room and the bedroom for the living area. The image to the right is a typical level with 2 ownership flats to the north and an SHA flat to the south. We work closely with SHA and the City Department of Community and Human Services to create a space that works for their residents. Our design team was able to include 4 fully accessible bathrooms in each SHA flat, helping to ensure that residents could stay in place as their needs changed. We also were able to build in some staff workspace, including a desk area, as well as creating a generously sized kitchen and living area for residents to congregate and for staff to provide daily services. This concludes the review of the submission materials. Before we open up to questions, I do want to briefly touch on the project schedule. The information we presented to you tonight is currently in front of city staff. We expect to receive comments by the middle of June. Once we receive comments, our team will begin work on another project update, which we call the complete submission. We expect this submission to be submitted in July. Moving into the fall, we will hold a 3rd community meeting to provide another update on the project prior to public hearings in either November or December. If the project is approved by the end of the year, we are currently targeting site work in the spring or summer of 2022, with building construction starting sometime in fall of 2022. We do not have specific information to share on expected sales dates at this time, but we hope to welcome new residents at some point in late 2023 or early 2024. With that, I would like to turn it back over to Kayla for questions.
Thanks, Matt. So just a brief kind of reminder of our questions process. You can ask questions using the Q&A box if you'd like to type them in. As well, if you hit the raise your hand button on the bottom of the screen, we will open up the microphone for an open mic question and answer period as well. This session is being recorded for distribution. If you would like to remain anonymous, please use the Q&A chat box to ask your question. Finally, we will be taking questions until 8:30 p.m. If there are questions that remain in the Q&A box, we will post them online on our website to be answered in the follow-up information that we provide. If you don't have a question in the Q&A box, but one comes to you or something comes up in your review of the PDF, you can also send the follow-up question to communications@housingalexandria.org. This will also be provided in the follow-up email to all attendees. And so as we get people into the queue raising their hands, I did have one question that came into the Q&A box about parking. I typed out an answer there, but Matt, if you could go, actually, no, sorry, there's a diagram right here. With the houses on Seminary Road, could the 1 through 13, I think specifically, could you just re-explain the front door versus garage entrance side and the what faces Seminary?
Sure, yeah, I wasn't too clear about that. So the front doors to the homes, which was the front elevation similar to this image, all face Seminary. So all of the garages load from the interior roadway that circles the site. There won't be any garages that face Seminary Road. All the garages will be internal. So it's just the front entryways and the windows facing Seminary.
Okay, I am going to move to our first open mic participant, Stephen Baker. You raise your hand and you should now have the ability to talk. If you can unmute your mic whenever you're ready.
My only question has to do with the look of the buildings. The houses across from Seminary are all brick. All the ones back in, behind those buildings are all brick. It just, I'm kind of shocked at what I'm seeing. The Encore buildings all look fairly uniform. If you go down to Cameron Station, the visuals have a commonality to it. Here it looks like an artist went wild with various different designs and dropped it into a neighborhood that's fairly conservative looking. Can you explain how this came about? And was it a measure of costs or materials? What was your thinking?
I can answer that. I appreciate the question. I think as Matt hinted at, colors, finishes, designs are to be determined. This is the first attempt that we had. We know we will get feedback from the city. We also get feedback, similar feedback from others that say you don't want, or that there's a goal to have the units break down and feel like different units, so it's not such a massive product. So and have a mixture of materials and unit types. So I think that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and we certainly know that we will have comments from the city and from folks like you on the architecture of it. To be honest, we have spent a lot more time on the layout of the site and how it's going to fit and how the garages are going to be and how they're going to face the street and et cetera. And this is our first attempt at this. We thought that it was important to have the different sticks facing in different directions to have a different feel. But your point is certainly well taken. And there's also a goal in the city to have, a mixture of materials, brick and hardy and others. But like I said, your point is well taken, and I think there's plenty of work to go and plenty of time to go on the facade choices.
I think you've done a good job with the layout of it. It's a vast improvement over the initial design, and having it limited to ownership, I think, was a great idea.
We appreciate that, and we will continue to work at this. The other thing that we spent time on here is getting a mixture of roof styles in the architecture. As Matt mentioned, some of them have this Mansford roof, some of them have flatter roofs, having cornices. So there's a lot of details yet to be worked out. And the one thing that I will say is that certainly cost is something that we consider, but is not the main driving factor of what our facades are going to look like.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to move to a question from the Q&A box. Oh, these are not rolling at the order they came in. This is a follow-up question on the parking. So there was a question that was submitted last week, and I think just more conversation about parking. There are only 19 parking spaces for visitors, SHA employees, etc. The question says, do you assume that residents won't be parking there, and where will visitors be parking as well as families?
I'm happy to take that one if you want, John.
Sure, that's great.
So the spaces that you are talking about are the ones that are on the surface that you see on the site plan. Each of the townhomes will have 2 parking spaces inside their garages for each townhouse unit, and those spaces are for the condominium flats and visitors. We actually exceed the parking requirement for the city for these units. We have 8 spaces over the parking requirement itself, and the parking requirement considers and takes into account visitor parking. So we actually are over and above what the city requires for parking. So we think we'll have ample parking on the site based on the experience of residences of this type.
All right, thank you, Mary Catherine. This question also comes from the Q&A. What kind of environmental studies will you be required to undergo in order to address all of the displacement of wildlife, rare owls, hawks, flocks of deer, etc.? Maintaining 51% of the open space does not address the impacts to taking down hundreds of mature trees and habitats.
Again, John, I'm happy to take that one
Sure,
if
yeah.
you want to. Sure, and I think that, you know, that's always a question that comes up. I will tell you, there aren't specific environmental studies about wildlife that are required for development. That's a good question. It's important to note that we were required to do a study to determine what features were included, what water features were included on the property. We talked about that at the first community meeting. Matt referenced it in his presentation. There is a small, what's called a wetland of minimal ecological value along the rear. That is not something that requires further permits from the Army Corps of Engineers or the state or the city, but we're going to stay off of it anyway. We think that that's just more prudent to stay away from that. And so in the provision of 51% open space, we're only required to provide 40% open space, because we're actually well exceeding that open space requirement. So I appreciate your question. And we have, as a requirement, as part of this process, creating a tree survey, existing tree survey. So that is part of this package, and so we can get the number of trees. That's the total on site and the total that are impacted. We can have that answer for you.
I think it's also just important or interesting to note that the way that we have laid the site out, we're keeping the back part of the site open, which connects to additional city open space in the back of the project. So there's still, when you connect those two spaces, a pretty significant run of open space that lands in the back of the site.
All right, thank you. I'm taking another question from the Q&A box. How high and what type of fence? My backyard runs the entire length of Stonebridge Road. So I think this is regarding the fence that is envisioned on the right-hand side or the eastern half of the property.
Yeah, the city zoning ordinance has a limitation on the size, the height of fences inside and rear yards. And so we'll be complying with that. I believe that height limit is 6 feet. Unless there is a transitional type of different uses, but I don't know that that would apply here. So I think it would likely be a 6-foot privacy fence. And I don't know, we know the type yet. I don't think that's been determined. We're happy to continue to talk with you. I know John and Matt and Bud Hart have met with you and your neighbors along that property line, and be happy to continue those discussions. I'm sorry that I couldn't make those. I hadn't been vaccinated yet at the time. So now that I am, I'll be able to make some of those meetings.
All right, thank you. This is another question that comes from the Q&A. I do believe that I saw somebody's hand shoot up, but it is no longer there. If you put your hand up and you're waiting on me to call on you, you may have accidentally lowered it. This question says, did you poll the neighborhood on this project? Also, how many trees are you cutting down for this project? Is it a done deal despite little engagement of the community?
I mean, I can start on that. I mean, we didn't run a survey of the neighborhood. Clearly the property owners that own the properties were interested in redeveloping. Although what I think is interesting and relevant is that in, I want to say, February of last year, there was a housing summit in the city. And, we obviously, my team attended to that, but, hundreds of people from around the city attended that summit as well. And the one thing that I walked away from at that meeting is understanding the demand and desire for affordable home ownership opportunities. And, up until this point, we had, well, early in the history of AHDC, we did some neighborhood stabilization, renovation, kind of for sale type of product. We've never done a full-on 100% affordable homeownership product. And there is clearly a huge demand for it in the city, and finding areas where you can integrate a medium density or a transition to provide this type of product is something that we certainly see a high demand for in the city. So no, we haven't. I would say that maybe we have different definitions of limited community engagement. We have now. I've went to civic association meetings. We have had a couple community events. We have actually taken our plans to the community or release them to the community as soon as we put them in. We've given access to them online, and we have tried to be as transparent as possible. And so I think that, and then as far as trees, I think Mary Catherine answered that. There's definitely a tree survey that is required. Our landscape architects have, or civil engineer have completed the survey of all the trees on site. And part of the process with the city will be determining what trees can be saved, what can be cut down, and then what trees we have to replace as part of our tree canopy as part of the redevelopment back. I will say that by walking on the site, some of the trees, not all, there's certainly some nice mature trees there, and some that will have to come down in order to make this development possible. But there is certainly more dead trees and trees that are not as in good of condition that you may think that are struggling from invasive species and a number of other issues with trees that obviously, if we take them down, we will replace the tree canopy as required per city regulations.
And John, just the last piece of the question here. Is this a done deal despite the little engagement of the community? Or I think more to the timeline.
Yeah, I think sorry, John, I'll take that one. I think
okay, thank you.
We don't ever anticipate anything's a done deal in Alexandria until the city council takes its final vote. And the city council is not going to vote on this until November or December of this year. And so there's a lot more time left in this process. As John said, this is actually one of the earliest times that I've ever seen a developer send their plans to the community. Our concept one submission was sent to the community before any of the layout was finalized. So I really think there has been a significant amount of outreach, and will continue to do that. Both as part of these processes in COVID, and as we move out of COVID, we'll figure out what our next type of community meeting looks like, but we'll continue to work with our neighbors and work with the community in general.
All right, thank you. This question comes from the chat. It says, do you know what the pricing will be for these units?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you've seen here, we've created a variety of units, right? So we definitely, the one thing that we think for sure is that the 3-bedroom units will be a different price than the 2-bedroom townhouse units, which will be a different price than the 2-bedroom condo flats. We are still kind of tweaking the models and figuring out where we think that we can, where people can afford. But what I can say is that none of the units will be priced higher than $400,000. That will be the high price, and then the twos will be less than that. And so we haven't completely worked out that price, but as we have said, that's all affordable to per the math of folks at 80% of area median income or less. We are actually working very hard to put a program in place to hopefully serve the residents that live in our rental properties and make a pathway to home ownership. We're not so naive to think that everybody will come from our properties, but the point is that we think that with financing rates and a number of other programs that we can wrap around these projects, in addition to lowering the price to below a market rate, that we can serve a population that's really kind of closer to that 60% of AMI, probably a little bit above it or in that range. So, pricing is a sensitive topic, and I understand that, and we are still working through it, but we have certainly set a high water mark.
Great, thanks, John. I'm going to take a question on live mic. So this is Carter Fleming. Carter, if you could unmute at any moment, you should be good to go.
Okay, thank you. I think I've unmuted successfully.
You have, yes.
Okay, thank you all for this presentation, and I applaud you for being brave enough to try the home ownership. It is certainly something that is needed in Alexandria, and I think many of us are supportive of that concept. I have basically two questions. The first is, I know the city wants this variation in architecture, but I think as you put this development in the middle of what has been a traditional single family neighborhood, I especially find just myself, and I'm old, so it might not be true, but units 5 through 8 fronting on Seminary Road, looking sort of the way that many people refer to developments that are coming through the city as sort of the Soviet bloc type architecture in an attempt to be modern. And so I would just urge you all, as you look at that, I think it's a more friendly front to the homes facing there, to have the more traditional. I like the way you've, varied the colors and everything. And I think that's probably a good variation, looking more like a traditional neighborhood instead of sort of this middle section that looks to me just a little bit out of place for where you're putting it. Over by the fire station, those modern units won't really be so visible, but I think the front of this development is important to the residents around there. So I just urge you to sort of take another look at the way you've done 5 through 8 there in the middle of the development. But that may, as I say, just be me. The second thing is, could we talk a little bit about drainage issues? And I know you've made a mention of the bioretention, but this is always an issue for every homeowner, even if their neighbor is adding a garage on. Everybody has water issues, and certainly in this part of town, we have big water issues. And so how are you addressing the flow of water to the neighbors that are there on Stonebridge and all? What will be done to ensure that water is not displaced onto their properties? So thank you.
Mary Catherine, maybe you can help me a little bit on the stormwater and talk about that. But I will, Carter, thank you for your question and your comments. I think your point is well taken on the architectural style. That's certainly things that we are open to looking at and thinking through what that looks like. Maybe even the roof style on those a little bit. Things like that. We are open to. Well, we're open to suggestions on everything, but I think that's a good comment, and we'll take it to heart and look at it. To the drainage, a very technical term is that we're going to be required to improve, runoff than over what it is today. And Mary Catherine, I think, can talk through the technicalities of that a little bit, and maybe in a future meeting we can have our civil engineer on as well. But and then Matt, you might want to talk a little bit about some of, if we have the bioretention and some of the rain garden things that we're thinking about doing with our landscape architect. But Mary Catherine, maybe you can pick me up a little bit.
We got something in the chat. I saw Kayla from Melanie Mason, who is the city's staff person in charge of stormwater management and planning. So if any other issues that come up. She said she's available. Well, technically what we are required to do under the regulations in the city code and from the Chesapeake Bay Act is so that we, in the post-development condition, you have to capture a certain amount of your water. You're not allowed to create a condition where you have additional water flow off of your property. So we have to demonstrate that through actual engineering calculations that we're not increasing the water flow off of our property. So, and we also then, in addition to having to capture the water that's flowing from our property, we actually then also have to hold it for a period of time in order to remove certain, I think it's phosphorus loads, I think that's correct. So in addition to holding the water, we actually are going to be filtering the water so that we make it better before it flows off of the property. So by all of our regulations, we are not allowed to increase the water flow off of our property. We'll actually make it better. And Carter, I think your question was as the properties that are on, will we be directing water towards the properties that are on Stonebridge? So the answer to that is no, we will not be doing that. And we're not allowed to do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just before, were we going to Matt about bioretention?
I think what John was asking Matt was that those bioretention facilities that Matt showed you in the fronts of those buildings, that's how we are doing some of that water capturing.
Right.
That is part of what we are doing to capture water, and then those that water is then held in those we call them BMPs, best management practices, so that they can't create that. What the question was an increased water flow.
Yeah, that's right. And the bioretention areas are in front of each unit. Those are only one piece of the stormwater management. There's permeable surfaces in the parking spaces. We have a large containment area closer to the back of the site. I apologize for not including those images here. They become a little cluttered to show on the screen. So there are a number of features that will be added and refined as we work through the process with the city, but the same requirements that Mary Catherine and John will still apply as we refine what those BMPs will be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carter.
Thank you.
I'm moving on to a question from the Q&A. What will the impact be on schools, sewers, and traffic in an already congested area?
John, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take that?
Go ahead.
So we will be required to have do an analysis of what the estimated number of school children might be coming from this type of a project. And the city has a very well-developed facility capacity study that determines what that number is. So we'll, as part of this process, we'll have that number. I don't know off the top of my head what that is right now. We'll get that information. We have engaged a traffic consultant, Gross Lade, in order to do a traffic memo on this site. We actually have we're coming out into an existing intersection, and so any and all traffic would be coming out at that light, and so that would any additional traffic is going to be regulated by that. We think that this property actually is going to have we have in the plan itself, there's a maximum number of cars per peak hour that are coming out of here, and it's going to have a minimal impact on the traffic that's flowing east and west on Seminary Road right now. And one of the things that we always need to talk about, and people don't often think about, is, you know, one of the issues in Alexandria is the traffic that flows through us, not the traffic that goes to us. And so one of the things that this project is going to do is it's actually going to allow people who might normally travel through Alexandria to have to live somewhere else to be able to get off the road earlier and live in the city of Alexandria, and a homeownership opportunity like this that, as we've been talking about, isn't always available. And so we think that those kind of impacts are going to be positive.
All right, thank you. This is another question from the Q&A. When will the city decide to change the zoning in this development? We live across the street, and this is somewhat disconcerting. All of the seminary units will face straight into our living room.
I appreciate that one, John. I just wanted to reiterate the schedule that Matt had shown earlier. public hearings for this project are slated for November, December of this year. We don't have a final date on that, and we'll continue to keep the community updated on to what that date actually is. So there's many months left before any decisions will be made on the rezoning. So there's plenty of time for you to participate in this process, and be happy to come talk with you about this project so that we can help get you a little bit less disconcerted.
And I mean, the rezoning would be presented to Planning Commission and City Council at the same time as the plan as a
Right.
whole.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Just as a brief hints, I don't know, I'm losing the word here. With the question and answer box, I don't necessarily have a perfectly chronological read through. So I'm going through the questions as we have them, and sometimes question askers are typing in follow-up questions or comments that relate to what was said. I am working to incorporate those, but losing a little bit of the thread, so my apologies on that. This question says, do any of you live on the West End?
We actually talked about this earlier today. I think every one of us had a 22304 zip code. I don't live there now, but I was born and raised about 6 blocks from this development off of Jordan Street. My parents still live in the same development, so my family is in this neighborhood all the time.
I live in the west end of Alexandria.
I'm also in 22304.
As do I.
This question comes from the Q&A. Can you comment on how close the proposed buildings are to neighboring property lines? This would not be an issue under the current residential zoning, but the large condominium building is only 16 feet away from existing homeowner properties. Isn't this a major impact of the rezoning effort?
I think that's a reasonable question, and I think yes, the side yard setback that we're looking to do is a typical. Usually it's a 1-to-3 ratio, so that if you're whatever your height is, your setback has to be a third of that, but there's a minimum, and the minimum is the 16 feet. And so we are going to be at least that 16 feet away from the property line. And similarly, in a lot of single family home restrictions, you can get closer than 16 feet, depending on the height of your unit. And it really all depends on the height of your unit. But yes, I think that's a reasonable question. And that's why we're looking to have as much of the landscaping in between that side of the condo building and the fencing that we're proposing, so that we do our best to minimize those impacts.
Matt, am I right? It's 17.5 feet is the distance in the property line and the condo building?
That's correct. The condo building is 17.5. Unit 13, shown on the right side of the diagram, is at its closest point 25 feet to the property line, and then the property line to its east. And then all the units that are fronting Seminary are at least 26. They're 26 or 27 feet from the property line, which is then another. There's another 6 feet for the public sidewalk right of way. So it's about 30, 32, 33 feet from the curb and gutter.
All right, thank you. This question asks, why put this in $1 million neighborhood?
I would
I'll take
answer
it.
this.
Mary
You will?
Catherine, yeah, I answer this because not everybody can afford $1 million home. You know, and we think that affordability is important. We think that a mix of housing types is what makes a city vibrant. And we certainly know that there's people that live and work in the city of Alexandria that can't afford $1 million houses. So that's why we do what we do.
All right, thank you. This is another question from the Q&A. How are you working with or presenting to the school board your plans to accommodate all the likely new students in the overcrowded public schools? For example, the children living at this property will be zoned to MacArthur, which is currently a swing space and already expecting new students from the Minokan project.
John, I'm happy to take
Go
that
ahead,
one as
yeah.
well. I appreciate that. Again, that's one of the things that the school board and the city council actually agreed upon as part of the school capacity years ago, was to do an analysis of the impact on the schools as a part of every project. And so while we don't go to the school board participated in estimating what those numbers were. And so while I appreciate there is going to be an impact on our schools, we think that the provision of providing affordability and home ownership is really worth it. And what we think we've done in changing the site plan and reducing the number of units here really has been a positive part of this process in working with the community.
Mayor Catherine, I would like to add one point on that point as well. Many of our financing programs and the city of Alexandria's previous affordable home ownership programs do require previous residents or those who live or work in the city of Alexandria. So many of the families that will be hopefully owning these properties are already city of Alexandria residents with students within the existing school systems.
All right, thank you. This question comes from the Q&A. I've noticed that most AHDC properties have dog breed restrictions. Will this project also have breed restrictions? And if so, how does that fit with Alexandria promoting itself as one of the dog-friendliest cities in the nation? The science and data on these restrictions demonstrates poor policy and is often rooted in human bias.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and I mean we can have debates on that, but to be honest, it's mostly insurance driven, and most condominium associations that operate in the city of Alexandria, and most condo bylaws have breed restrictions, and it's just not an uncommon thing in any multifamily or condo association in the city. So we have not drafted the condo bylaws for this project yet, but it would not surprise me if when we did that there are breed restrictions within the regs, but that's to be determined.
All right, so this question comes from the Q&A. It's a comment, but I believe I'm trying to thread it back to when it came in. But the comment says, sounds as if you are doing the absolute minimum that is required by law. And I believe this was relating to parking. Question asked here, if I've gotten that wrong, please feel free to chime in. But yeah, I think that's what it's from.
And I think that's the same person. I would agree, but I would disagree with that statement. We're not doing the absolute minimum. Actually, we actually have a spaces over and above what the minimums are that are required by the city, and so we think we're actually doing really well by the city standards.
And the question asker follows up and says, it was across the board, not just parking.
Well, I would say actually, I think across the board we are actually exceeding the requirements for open space. We are exceeding the requirements for the buffer for the wetland of minimal ecological value. We don't have to stay out of it, but we are, because we're trying to make sure we're having less of an impact here. And so I think we're actually exceeding the city standards in a number of ways.
All right, I believe that this comment was also feedback related to the topic of fencing. The comment says, I would like to have an 8-foot to a 10-foot fence.
That's something we'd have to talk to the city about. I think that would require a variation to the height requirements. It's something we can talk to them about to see if that's even possible. I don't know if it is based on our height restrictions in the city.
All right, this question is from the Q&A. Are you still willing to consider alternate site layouts, or is this essentially the final plan you are proposing? I submitted some alternate concepts last week, but it sounds like they may have issues, but is the team still open to options if it addresses the concerns of the community?
I think that we will wait and hear back from the city on their comments on our site layout. We have been working with this layout, and as Matt showed early in the presentation, we've made a number of shifts in the layout, throughout the time frame of the project. And so I think we would think we're getting pretty close to where the layout of the site is going to be. And of course, we will take comments from the city on their take on that. We think that the layout and the height of the buildings are respectful and as a transitional project, and respectful of the heights surrounding the project. I mean, Mary Catherine, I don't know if you have a follow-up on that, but
Yeah, I think the comments that we received from TAB were very were great comments, and I think that warrants us responding to them. John, I think you had some good responses to them in an email, and we're happy to make that available, and happy to talk further if you have some further questions and have some other questions that we might be able to talk through with you. But yes, we've seen those comments, and we'd be happy to continue to talk through them with you. But I think, as you said, I think some of the suggestions had some issues that we'd be more than happy to talk about.
This question comes from the Q&A. Will you replant every tree that was destroyed?
No. We are going to exceed the requirements for the tree canopy that's on the site, and I know that's a hard thing. Sometimes people don't like to hear, but I try to be very honest in my answers. And we won't be replacing caliper for caliper, but we are going to be making sure that we are as respectful and installing additional street trees, installing other trees and landscaping in the site. So while we're not going to be replacing tree for tree, we are being very deliberative about making sure that we are keeping as many trees as we can and planting as many more as is possible.
Okay, so at this point, I don't have any more questions in the Q&A box. I'll take a pause. I did try to follow up with one question asker to make sure that their topic was covered. Again, my apologies. I'm struggling to touch with the thread. I see that I think somebody is trying to raise their hand in the chat, and when they go to raise their hand, it immediately disappears. I think if you tap the button once, I apologize, question asker, but okay, there it goes again. I'm going to give permission for this person to talk. If you have a question, please feel free to ask it. See if we can accommodate maybe an issue with the raise your hand button. If you have a question, please feel free to unmute.
All right, I'm unmuted.
Yes, we've got you.
My name is Jack Sullivan. I have a question for Ms. Gibbs. Does this development require a map amendment in the zoning, on the zoning map?
We are looking into that right now, Mr. Sullivan. The zoning for the property, as you know, we're looking to change to permit us to have townhouse units and congregate housing on it. There is likely a map amendment because of that. I mean, when you do a zoning amendment, it's a map amendment.
All right, if that is the case, then if there is remaining concerns about this development, would an 11808 petition from neighbors be acceptable, or would it be valid?
It would depend on who files the petition and it as it's reviewed to see whether or not it's a valid petition.
A valid petition could be filed against what comes up before council then.
If a valid petition is put together, it could be.
Right. All right. That's good to know. And I thank you for the answer.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you very much. I also had one question that came in as well. It says, I can't wrap my head around this. isn't there a property already here now? And I think this might be referring to the existing properties that were on the parcelages. Question asker, if you have more information, please feel free to chat or put it into the question and answer box.
Yeah, I think the question relates to, is there existing development already on the property? And yes, Matt, as Matt described, there are 2 existing single family homes on the property and a vacant parcel. So we would be looking to redevelop, take those 2 houses down and then redevelop with the plan that we're proposing.
Okay, at this time, I don't have any more questions in the question and answer box, and I don't see any hands raised for the Q&A section. I think we'll wait and pause for a moment just to see if any come in, if there's any last minute questions. As we wait for that, just as a follow-up, we will be sending a follow-up email to everybody who participated in this webinar. So you will receive the slides as well as a link to where we will be posting the video and the written Q&A. Video will come out in about 24 to 48 hours. The written Q&A does take longer. It's just a matter of getting it and having to transcribe. It takes a little while, but we will also send follow-up to everybody who is here when the written Q&A is completed. I do have a question. I have a question asker here with a raised hand. So Kimberly Wilson, you can unmute and ask your question whenever you're ready. And Kimberly, if you are there, you are currently muted.
She just typed the question in.
All right, I'll go ahead and read the question. How will the residents of the group home be accommodated while this development is going on?
It's a great question, and we addressed it in the first meeting, and I'm glad you asked it again, and maybe we just need to reiterate that at each meeting. They will be relocated during construction, just like we did with the project that Kayla described at the beginning for the homes that we have on Bellefonte. The SHA residents were relocated, and at that time they were relocated to Southern Towers. And so, and then brought back after the construction was completed. Every resident who lived there before was offered the opportunity to come back. And so we will do the same for the residents who live in the Seminary House now.
And we will be required to submit a relocation plan to the landlord and tenant board as part of the approvals of the project.
All right, thank you, Kimberly. A question from the Q&A. Will you notify this audience of when you have council or planning commission hearings?
Yes.
Yes.
And in addition to this audience, we have a general distribution list that we put out as well. Information about signing up for this distribution list will be included in the follow-up emails from this meeting. If you would like to be included in that, you'll be able to click on a link and join the distribution list, or you can simply reply to the follow-up email and we will add you to it on the back end as well.
We also have required notifications that go out according to the city zoning ordinance that are sent out by certified mail according to the requirements of the city code.
This question comes from the Q&A. Will you post the city's comments on the revised plan when you receive them?
Yes, they're public documents. So yeah, and I'm pretty sure, Kayla, correct me if I'm wrong, but the comments from concept 1 and 1A have been posted on our site as well. Is that correct?
You know, I don't know if the comments have been posted on our site, but that is certainly something we can upload. It might just be an oversight on our part.
Yeah, we can post the city's comments. They're public. That's right.
And then this information will also be included in follow-up communications as well. But if you would like to see the website that I am talking, or the section on our website I'm talking about, the link to it is in the chat.
And if you sign up for any of the communications, as Kayla has mentioned, when we post new items, we can also let the group know when new items have been uploaded for you to review.
And I'll make sure that the city comments that we're talking about here are put on our website within the next 24 hours.
Okay.
A question from the Q&A. Have you already purchased the homes that will be demolished, and how much will you be paying for each property?
We have them under contract. We haven't purchased them yet. We got a purchase option on them. Obviously, the one is a vacant parcel. The other is with our partnership with Sheltered Homes of Alexandria, and the third is a private sale that we have under contract.
Kayla, if you don't mind, if we don't have any other questions, I just wanted to say I really appreciate the input that we're getting from the community. I think these are a lot of constructive questions, a lot of constructive comments. And I want everybody to understand we do take these comments to heart. We don't go into these meetings thinking that anything is a done deal. We always like to listen to our neighbors and the community, and I will be more than willing and happy to continue those discussions as we move forward.
So I don't have any more questions in the Q&A box at the moment. But as Mary Catherine said, we do take questions and feedbacks and comments to heart. And if on the next page, Matt, you could pull it up. We have the address where the main hub of all of this information is, as well as this email address, communications@housingalexandria.org. You can send an email to communications@housingalexandria. There's also a form on the seminary page itself that you can type in your comments and your questions there if you would prefer. An email address is requested there so we can reply to you, but it is another way that you can get in contact with us.
Okay. All right.
Well,
the
thank
one
you,
last-
everybody, so much for your time here this evening. We look forward to continuing to work with everybody as we go through.
Thanks.
The one last thing I wanted to say, in addition to our information distribution list, we also have a specific list that people can sign up for that is just if you are interested in any of the home buyer, homeowner resources that exist. If we've moved towards developing this project, we would like to help people who are looking for information on the resources that exist in the city of Alexandria to help facilitate first-time home buyers. This list is separate from the distribution list, so that way people who are just looking for those resources can maintain on a distinct list from the distribution list. And then lastly, in addition to the Seminary Road distribution list, which we will only reach out to with seminary specific information, we do have a monthly newsletter as well. Meetings like this get announced in our monthly newsletter, as well as for our other development projects, in addition to ongoing news and updates about AHDC communities. So those are the many different email lists we can sign you up for. And if that's confusing and you're not sure which one you want to be on, just send an email to communications@housingalexandria.org, and we will make sure that you get the information that you were looking for. Okay, with that, I don't see any additional incoming questions. I know we're 15 minutes early, but I think at this point we will probably go ahead and call the meeting. No questions remain, but as always, if you send them within the next 24 hours or so here to communications@housingalexandria.org, we can incorporate them into the follow-up Q&A that we put on our website. So as John said, thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and have a good night and enjoy this summer weather that we're starting to poke into.
Night, guys. Thank
Thanks
you.
all.